What really happens when a narcissist breaks the soul contract with an empath? Because most people think the empath loses, but the truth is far more shocking. When this contract ends, something shifts in the spiritual world, something the narcissist never expects and the empath never sees coming. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why this ending is actually the biggest awakening of your life. You might think they walked away. You might think they won. But what if I told you the moment they leave is the moment their spiritual power over you collapses? What if the breakup wasn't a loss, but a divine release? In today's video, I'm breaking down the hidden spiritual laws behind this contract, why the narcissist pulls away, what the empath gains, and the surprising twist the universe reveals afterward. And before we dive in, tell me in the comments, do you believe soul contracts can expire? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're ready to heal, grow, and rise higher, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss the messages that were meant for you.
Most people believe a narcissist ends the relationship out of power, control, or superiority. But spiritually, something very different is happening. The soul contract between an empath and a narcissist doesn't really break, it expires. And when it expires, it does so with a quiet precision that only the universe understands. Narcissists walk away thinking they made the final decision, believing their silence, distance, or cold withdrawal proves they were the one in charge. But the truth is far more mysterious and far more powerful than their ego can comprehend. What actually ends the bond is not their choice. It is the moment the empath completes the lesson their soul came to learn. And once that lesson reaches maturity, the contract dissolves on its own, like ink disappearing from old paper. The universe simply closes the chapter because keeping it open no longer serves the empath's growth. You see, empaths don't leave easily. They stay, they try, they heal, they forgive, they hope. Their loyalty is deep and their heart is naturally committed. This is why the universe often has to be the one to remove the narcissist. It isn't punishment, it isn't revenge, it's protection. When the cycle finishes, the connection loses its energetic purpose. The empath may feel confusion, heartbreak, or shock, but spiritually, their soul is being released. That release is not dramatic, it is subtle, gentle, and silent, almost like a door softly closing behind them. And even if the empath doesn't realize it immediately, something inside them begins to shift. Their emotional dependency loosens, their intuition grows louder, their tolerance for disrespect decreases. Slowly, their soul starts pulling their heart away from the place where it once felt stuck. And here's the part the narcissist never sees coming. Once the contract expires, their power over the empath collapses instantly. It doesn't matter if the narcissist tries to return, breadcrumb, provoke jealousy, or re-enter through a new angle. The energy no longer responds the same way. The empath might still feel pain, but the spell is broken. The emotional hook that once kept them tied is gone, removed by something much higher than their conscious will. The universe does not allow the empath to repeat a lesson they have already learned. This expiration is similar to a classroom door opening at the end of a long exam. The empath walked in to understand self-worth, boundaries, emotional discernment, and the ability to love without losing themselves. The narcissist walked in to reflect those lessons back, often in painful ways. But once the exam is done, the universe doesn't keep them in the room any longer. When the purpose has been fulfilled, the contract naturally dissolves. The empath is free to move to the next level of their spiritual journey. The narcissist, however, remains exactly where the contract ended, repeating the same patterns with someone new. In the end, the empath discovers something powerful. Endings are not always punishments. Sometimes they're graduations, and freedom begins the moment the soul contract quietly expires. When the narcissist finally withdraws, something remarkable begins to happen inside the empath. A shift so powerful that it almost feels supernatural. For so long, the empath's energy was pulled, drained, twisted, and stretched thin by someone who never gave back, someone who fed off every bit of kindness, patience, and emotional warmth. But the moment that connection breaks, the energy that had been leaking out stops instantly, and instead of collapsing, the empath experiences a rebound wave, a sudden rise of spiritual and emotional strength that feels like their soul taking its first full breath in years. It's as if their inner light, once dimmed, begins to burn brighter again. Their body relaxes, their mind clears, their spirit lifts. And without the constant emotional demand from the narcissist, the empath's energy begins to return to its rightful place, flowing back like water returning to its source. This rebound is not slow or subtle. It is rapid and intense, because the empath was never weak. They were simply drained, and now their spirit has space to recover. As this energy comes back, so does their intuition. The empath begins to sense things clearly again. The red flags they ignored, the emotional shifts they once absorbed without question, the truth they pushed away to keep the connection alive. Their inner voice, once drowned out by guilt, confusion, and manipulation, grows louder and sharper. They begin to understand people's intentions more easily. They feel their own boundaries more strongly. Their emotional radar becomes almost impossible to fool because their soul has been recalibrated by the pain they endured. And with this clarity comes a strength they didn't even know they possessed. Their aura, once dimmed by constant emotional assault, becomes stronger, brighter, and more magnetic. People notice the change, even if the empath says nothing. Their presence feels different, more grounded, more confident, more protected. The most powerful shift, however, happens in their boundaries. The empath who once tolerated disrespect, who once forgave too quickly, who once gave too much, suddenly becomes unshakable. They stop explaining themselves. They stop overgiving. They stop absorbing everyone's emotions as their responsibility. Their heart becomes wiser, not colder. Their compassion becomes selective, not blind. And the energy that once flowed outward too freely now stays within longer, preserved for the people who truly deserve it. This rebound wave transforms the empath from someone who was exhausted into someone who is empowered. The narcissist expected them to fall apart, but instead, the empath rises. The narcissist expected them to chase, but the empath steps back. What the narcissist thought would destroy the empath is exactly what awakens them. This rebound energy is not just recovery, it is rebirth. It is the soul reclaiming what was stolen. And once the empath's energy returns, they never look at themselves or relationships the same way again.
When the soul contract ends, the narcissist doesn't just lose a partner, they lose their mirror. This is something most narcissists never understand until it's gone. An empath reflects truth, kindness, patience, and emotional honesty in a way no one else ever has. They show the narcissist who they could be, who they pretended to be, and who they failed to be. And because narcissists lack emotional depth within themselves, they rely on this reflection more than they realize. The empath becomes the source of identity, admiration, validation, and moral grounding. The empath is the mirror that softens their flaws and makes them feel important, lovable, and powerful. But once the soul contract expires, that mirror disappears, and suddenly the narcissist is left alone with their true, unfiltered self. Without that reflection, the narcissist can no longer avoid the emptiness they have been running from. They lose the stability the empath provided, the emotional clarity the empath offered, and the spiritual depth they borrowed but never owned. For the first time, the narcissist faces their own emotional void without someone gently guiding them back to compassion or reminding them of their humanity. And this loss hits them harder than they admit. Narcissists depend on reflection for their sense of identity. They shape themselves according to the reactions, warmth, and empathy of others, especially someone who sees them deeply. But when the empath steps out of their life, the narcissist cannot find that same reflection anywhere else. Other people either call them out, reject them, or see through them. The false self they created begins to crack because no one is supporting the illusion anymore. The empath's presence once held their world together, but the narcissist always mistook that support for weakness. Now, without that grounding energy, they feel unstable, irritated, restless, and emotionally starved. They don't understand why other relationships feel shallow, why people don't admire them the same way, or why they keep feeling misunderstood. They don't realize that the reflection they lost was the only source that ever made them feel whole. Meanwhile, the empath experiences the opposite. The moment they stop reflecting the narcissist's world, they begin reflecting their own. They rediscover their identity. Their emotional space expands. Their self-worth comes back. And they finally see how much they lost trying to hold up a mirror for someone who didn't want to grow. The empath returns to their own truth, while the narcissist is left with the emptiness they always tried to hide. This is why narcissists often return, why they circle back, why they pop up suddenly after months or years. They are not coming back for love. They are coming back for reflection, because the empath was the only person who ever made them feel like they were someone. But once that mirror is taken away, once the empath realizes their value, the narcissist's illusion collapses completely. And nothing hurts a narcissist more than losing the only reflection that ever made them feel real.
When the connection with a narcissist finally ends, something extraordinary begins to unfold in the empath's life. Almost like stepping into a brand new reality. The break doesn't just remove a toxic person, it triggers a full spiritual shift, lifting the empath into a higher timeline they were never able to reach while carrying emotional weight that didn't belong to them. During the relationship, the empath's energy was stuck in survival mode, trying to fix, trying to understand, trying to heal someone who had no intention of changing. Their intuition was muffled, their blessings were delayed, their opportunities were blocked, because their spirit was tied to someone who drained more than they gave. But once the contract expires and the narcissist steps out, it's as if the universe suddenly breathes again around the empath. Doors begin to open without effort. People with genuine hearts enter their life. Synchronicities increase. Peace settles into their daily routine. Life starts moving in the direction it was always meant to go, but couldn't as long as the empath was spiritually tethered to someone misaligned with their purpose. This higher timeline feels different immediately. The empath wakes up with more clarity. Their mind feels lighter. Their emotions flow with ease instead of chaos. They begin to attract relationships that are gentle, supportive, and emotionally mature. Relationships that don't feel like a battlefield, but a sanctuary. Opportunities they once hesitated to pursue suddenly feel possible. New ideas, new dreams, new goals rise within them because their energy is no longer being consumed by conflict or confusion. Divine timing begins to operate at full speed, bringing them the people and experiences their soul has been requesting in silence. They start noticing meaningful coincidences, hearing the right message at the right time, meeting someone who offers exactly what they need, finding themselves in places that accelerate their growth. This isn't luck, it's alignment. And this alignment creates the glow that so many empaths experience after a breakup. Their energy returns to its original frequency, their heart softens, their spirit strengthens, and their aura becomes brighter. They look healthier, calmer, more grounded, not because someone healed them, but because the removal of the wrong person restored them. That glow isn't physical, it's spiritual. It's the body responding to peace. It's the soul responding to freedom. It's the universe saying, now you can rise. The empath didn't just leave a relationship. They left a lower timeline that kept them small. And because of that, they upgrade mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even financially. Everything begins to move forward. This is the hidden blessing behind the end of the soul contract. What feels like heartbreak is actually elevation. What feels like loss is redirection. The empath doesn't just recover, they ascend. And the life they step into afterward is always higher, healthier, and more aligned than anything they experienced before.
When the soul contract ends and the empath steps out of the narcissist's life, the narcissist doesn't enter freedom, they enter chaos. Without the empath's stabilizing energy, something inside them begins to unravel. The person who once grounded their emotions, who soothed their ego, who absorbed their storms, is suddenly gone, and the narcissist is left face to face with their own emotional void. This void has always been there, but the empath protected them from feeling it. Now, without that soft energy to lean on, nothing feels enough. No attention satisfies them. No praise lasts. No new relationship gives the sense of security the empath once provided. They move from person to person, thrill to thrill, distraction to distraction, but everything feels shallow, temporary, and disappointing. Their life becomes noisier, more arguments, more restlessness, more tension, because the empath's calming presence is no longer balancing their inner chaos. They feel a growing discomfort they can't name. They become irritable, impulsive, and unstable, searching desperately for something that feels like home, not realizing the home they lost was the emotional sanctuary the empath created around them. The narcissist tries to fill this void with control, attention, and new supply, but nothing sticks. Their relationships become more dramatic, their routines become more chaotic, their decisions become more self-sabotaging. They start to feel like the world is turning against them, not understanding that they are facing the consequences of the energy they once projected outward. The silence the empath leaves behind becomes deafening, and that silence forces the narcissist to confront what they have always avoided: their emptiness, their insecurity, their emotional hunger. The empath's exit exposes the internal storm they've kept hidden under charm and manipulation. And instead of rising from the breakup, the narcissist spirals deeper into cycles of conflict and emotional imbalance. This chaos cycle is not punishment. It is the natural result of removing the one person who held their world together. The empath was the stabilizer, the emotional anchor, the quiet healer who kept the narcissist from collapsing under their own weight. Without that, the narcissist is left with the truth they spent their entire life escaping. And while the empath rises to a higher timeline, the narcissist sinks into the turbulence of their unhealed wounds, repeating the same patterns with different people. This is the spiritual irony. The empath glows after the breakup, but the narcissist breaks down. And their chaos cycle continues until they face themselves, something most narcissists will never do. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when the illusion finally shatters, slowly at first, like a tiny crack in glass, and then all at once, like a mirror breaking into pieces that can never be repaired.
This is the moment the empath sees the relationship with the narcissist without fantasy, without hope, without excuses. And that moment is both heartbreaking and liberating. Because for the first time, the empath realizes, I wasn't loved, I was used. Those 5 words hit like a storm, washing away years of confusion. It isn't bitterness that comes first, it's clarity. A clarity so sharp that it feels like waking up from a long, heavy dream. The empath begins to see the patterns they once justified, the manipulation they once misunderstood its passion, the inconsistency they once blamed on trauma, the emotional hunger they once mistook for love. They see how every moment of tenderness had strings attached, how every apology was a tactic, how every compliment was a hook, how their compassion was not appreciated, but consumed. And in that painful clarity, the empath finally understands that love was never the foundation of the connection. Supply was. They were valued for what they gave, not for who they were. And that realization becomes the turning point of their soul. As this truth settles into their heart, something begins to shift inside the empath. The heart that once stretched itself thin now begins to pull itself back together. The energy that once poured outward uncontrollably now flows inward, like water returning to its source. The empath begins to understand how deeply they abandoned themselves while trying to save someone who never intended to be saved. They see how much they dimmed their own light to soothe someone else's darkness, how much they gave up sleep, peace, joy, confidence, all to hold together a relationship that was never meant to survive. They remember how they blamed themselves for the narcissist's moods, how they questioned their own worth, how they twisted themselves into smaller versions to keep someone else feeling big. And with this realization comes an ache so deep it almost feels physical. But that ache is not weakness, it is awakening. The illusion shattering is the moment the empath stops romanticizing what happened. They stop telling themselves stories that make the narcissist look wounded and themselves look needed. They stop believing that more love could have healed someone who didn't want healing. They stop replaying memories to find the good hidden inside the manipulation. They stop waiting for closure from someone who avoids responsibility like a shadow avoids light. Instead, they begin to see the relationship for what it was, a spiritual classroom, a soul contract, a lesson in self-respect disguised as love. And suddenly, the empath realizes that the pain they endured had a purpose, because without it, they would have never learned how to choose themselves. As the illusion dissolves, the empath begins to feel their self-respect forming like new roots beneath their feet. They start setting boundaries that feel bold and unfamiliar. They start saying no without guilt. They start recognizing red flags instantly. They start valuing their energy the way they once valued others. They begin to move differently, more grounded, more aware, more self-protective. The same heart that once cracked from overgiving now grows stronger from understanding its worth. They no longer need someone to validate their goodness. They can feel it within themselves. They no longer crave the approval that kept them trapped. They crave peace instead. They no longer chase love that hurts. They wait for love that speaks the same language as their soul. This is the transformation the narcissist never expected. They believe the empath would always come back. They believe the empath would always forgive. They believed the empath's compassion was endless, their loyalty automatic. But once the illusion shatters, there is no going back. Something inside the empath quietly closes. A door that was once wide open now shuts with a finality the narcissist cannot undo. The empath isn't cold, they are aware. They aren't bitter, they are healed. They aren't seeking revenge, they are seeking alignment. And this emotional shift marks the true end of the soul contract because the empath is no longer energetically available for the cycles that kept them trapped. With this newfound clarity, the empath begins to transform in ways they could never have imagined. Their intuition sharpens, their emotional boundaries solidify, their inner voice becomes louder, guiding them away from people who feel familiar but not safe. They start attracting relationships that feel gentle instead of dramatic. They develop a love for solitude that once felt scary. They reconnect with passions and dreams they abandoned to support the narcissist's world. Their spirit begins to glow again, not for someone else, but for themselves. This glow is the sign of healing, the sign of reawakening, the sign that the empath has reclaimed their power. And ironically, this glow is exactly what makes the narcissist want them back. But the empath, now awakened, sees the pattern clearly. They understand the difference between love and attachment, between affection and control, between connection and dependency. They understand that true love lifts, not drains. True love heals, not wounds. True love grows, not consumes. In the end, the shattering of the illusion becomes the foundation of the empath's new life. It becomes the birthplace of their self-respect, their strength, their boundaries, and their rebirth. It becomes the moment their soul takes back its power. And once an empath reaches this clarity, there is no force, no manipulation, no apology, no charm that can ever pull them back into the darkness they escaped. Their healing begins the moment they finally see the truth. They were never unlovable. They were simply giving their love to someone who could never receive it.
There comes a point in every empath's journey where the pain becomes so loud, the confusion so heavy, and the emotional exhaustion so deep that even the universe steps in. And this is the part most empaths don't understand while they're in it. God removes the narcissist because the empath would never leave on their own. The empath's heart is wired for loyalty, forgiveness, and hope. They don't give up easily, not even when they're hurting. They see potential where others see danger. They see the wounded child inside the narcissist, not the cruel adult standing in front of them. They hold on to moments of tenderness, even if those moments were small and manipulated. They cling to the idea that love can heal anything, even someone who refuses to be healed. And because the empath's heart is so devoted, God has to intervene. The divine knows that the empath's love, while pure, can also blind them to the truth. They would keep giving, keep trying, keep fixing, keep sacrificing until nothing remained of their own identity. They would never walk away. So God creates a break so loud it cannot be ignored. A betrayal, a sudden exit, a shift so painful that the empath has no choice but to step back. What looks like abandonment is really protection. What feels like rejection is redirection. And what seems like the worst loss is actually the beginning of the empath's spiritual rescue. In the early stages, the empath doesn't see this. They feel shattered, they feel confused. They replay every memory, every conversation, every warning sign they overlooked. They blame themselves, wondering if they weren't patient enough, loving enough, or understanding enough. They grieve someone who was never truly theirs. They mourn a future that only existed in their imagination. And in that grief, they can't yet see God's hand moving. They think they were left behind, when in truth they were lifted out of harm's way. The empath thinks, why didn't I get a chance to fix it? But the divine answer is clear, because fixing it would have destroyed you. The empath would never have stopped trying, never stopped giving, never stopped hoping. And God knew that as long as the narcissist remained, the empath's soul would stay trapped in a cycle of emotional starvation. So the divine removes what the empath cannot release. This removal isn't gentle. It's sharp and sudden, because gentle nudges don't work on hearts that love too deeply. Sometimes God has to break your heart to save your spirit. As time begins to pass, the empath starts noticing something they could never see while inside the relationship: peace returning. At first, it's small. Sleep comes easier, anxiety slowly fades, and the emotional chaos that once felt normal no longer feels acceptable. The empath realizes they aren't walking on eggshells anymore. They aren't apologizing for things that aren't their fault. They aren't shrinking themselves to keep someone else comfortable. They aren't absorbing someone's anger, insecurity, or emptiness. Their nervous system begins to settle, like a storm finally calming after years of violent winds. And in that stillness, the empath begins to see the truth of what they survived. They see how they were manipulated, drained, controlled, and emotionally starved. They realize they were giving their soul to someone who only wanted their energy. And suddenly, what once felt like love now looks like a lesson. What once looked like heartbreak now looks like escape. What once felt like a curse now feels like protection. Slowly, the empath begins to understand God didn't remove them to hurt you. God removed them because you were hurting yourself, trying to keep them. The narcissist was never meant to stay. They were part of a spiritual assignment, a test of boundaries, self-worth, and awakening. The empath had to learn the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. They had to learn that loyalty means nothing when it's tied to someone who exploits it. They had to learn that love isn't supposed to feel like anxiety, silence, confusion, and pain. They had to learn that their heart was not made to be wasted on someone emotionally incapable of loving them back. And the only way to learn these lessons was through loss. Divine intervention always feels painful at first because it pulls you away from what is familiar, not from what is good. The most powerful part of this divine removal is what happens next: the rebuilding. The empath begins to reconnect with themselves in ways they never imagined. They rediscover their strength, their voice, their intuition, and their personal worth. They begin to feel lighter, brighter, and more alive. Opportunities appear, new people enter their life, and blessings that were blocked begin to flow freely. The empath glows, not because they've moved on, but because they've moved up. Their energy becomes cleaner, stronger, and more protected. They become unrecognizable to their past self. And this glow is the very thing that exposes the truth behind the narcissist's exit. The removal was not a punishment, but a release. The universe didn't take away love. It took away the lie that the empath believed was love.
The moment an empath disconnects, the narcissist feels it, not mentally, not emotionally, but spiritually. In a place within themselves they cannot name, cannot control, and cannot hide from. People often believe narcissists don't care, that they walk away unfazed, unaffected, unbroken. But the truth is more complex and more haunting. A narcissist always feels the empath's absence on a soul level. Even if they pretend to move on instantly, even if they flaunt a new supply within days, even if they act like nothing ever mattered, their spirit registers the loss like a sudden collapse in their inner ecosystem. To a narcissist, the empath wasn't just a partner. They were a source of emotional oxygen, the stabilizing force that held the narcissist's chaotic inner world together. And when that energy is gone, the narcissist isn't just alone, they are spiritually starving. They feel the sudden silence where the empath's warmth used to be. They feel the withdrawal of unconditional compassion. They feel the absence of the emotional mirror that once reflected back a version of themselves they could tolerate. Without that reflection, they are forced to face the emptiness they spend their entire lives running from. They sense the shift instantly, an energetic closing of a portal. It is not something they can explain, but it hits them like a disturbance in their emotional universe. They feel a distance, a door shutting, a light turning off. For the first time in a long time, the narcissist is left alone with their unfiltered self. No validation, no admiration, no emotional supply, no empathic presence to steady them. This spiritual void grows restless inside them, triggering an inner panic they try desperately to mask. They may deny it with arrogance, distract themselves with new people, drown themselves in attention, or overcompensate with grandiosity, but nothing silences the spiritual echo that whispers, "You lost someone you will never find again." Narcissists do not attach to people, they attach to energy, and the empath's energy is rare, pure, stabilizing, nourishing. When it is gone, the narcissist spirals. They can't sleep the same. Their mood shifts unpredictably. Their thoughts become noisy and disorganized. Life feels less meaningful, less exciting, less vibrant. Their new supply doesn't satisfy them. Nothing calms the restlessness that spreads through their spirit. They cannot replicate the empath's emotional presence. They cannot replace that level of spiritual connection, even though they never valued it when they had it. The narcissist may appear fine on the surface, posting pictures, pretending to be happy, acting like they've moved on. But inside, they feel a spiritual drop in frequency. They sense that the empath's energy is no longer accessible to them. They can no longer tap into the empath's intuition, love, support, and emotional stability. This causes a deep, unspoken grief in the narcissist, one they never admit even to themselves. They start to feel ungrounded, disconnected from life, and strangely hollow. There is a reason narcissists often return months or even years later. Their spirit remembers what their ego denied. Their soul recognizes the loss long before their mind does. They feel the empath's withdrawal like the sudden loss of a vital life force. And though they never show it, they feel abandoned, not because they loved the empath, but because they depended on them emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The empath was the place where the narcissist's chaos could rest. The empath was the emotional compass they stole stability from. The empath was the sanctuary they took for granted. And when that door closes, the narcissist enters a spiritual winter, a cold, echoing emptiness, a loneliness that no crowd can fix, a hunger that no new supply can satisfy. They wander from person to person, draining, taking, demanding, desperately searching for even a fraction of the connection they once had. But they never find it, because the narcissist's connection to the empath was not ordinary. It was karmic, energetic, and spiritually binding. And when the empath finally heals, detaches, and steps into their higher timeline, that spiritual cord breaks permanently. The narcissist feels it like a shockwave through their entire being. They sense the shift in vibration. They feel the emotional doorway closing forever. And no matter how loudly their ego screams, their spirit knows the truth. The empath is gone, truly gone, untouchable, unreachable. And what terrifies the narcissist the most is knowing that it was their own behavior that caused the loss. They pushed away the only soul who ever brought them peace, the only person who ever tried to understand them, the only heart that ever showed them unconditional love. And they will never admit it, but they feel that loss in their blood, in their bones, in the quiet moments when their mask falls off and their inner emptiness returns. They feel it when they wake up in the middle of the night restless. They feel it when they realize their new relationships lack depth. They feel it when nothing feels enough anymore. They feel it every time they sense the empath glowing, rising, healing, moving toward a higher timeline they can no longer access. And the deepest truth of all is this: the narcissist doesn't fear losing the empath's love. They fear losing the empath's energy, because without it, they are forced to face what they truly are: spiritually disconnected and emotionally hollow. And though they may pretend otherwise, their soul knows the truth. The empath's absence is the one loss they will never recover from.
When an empath finally separates from a narcissist, something extraordinary begins to happen. Something they never expected, something they could never imagine while they were trapped in that emotional prison. For the longest time, the empath's gifts were buried beneath guilt, confusion, and constant self-doubt. Their intuition was silenced. Their emotional intelligence was weaponized against them. Their natural ability to love was turned into a tool of manipulation, and their compassionate heart was drained day after day. They were spiritually suffocating without even realizing it. But the moment the spiritual contract ends, the moment the narcissist is removed, the moment the cycle breaks, something in the empath awakens. It does not happen slowly. It does not happen quietly. It happens like a soul unlocking after years of being imprisoned. Because separation from a narcissist is not just a breakup, it is activation. It's the beginning of the empath meeting a version of themselves they didn't even know existed. 1. Heightened intuition. The inner voice returns. When the narcissist leaves, the empath's intuition rises like a phoenix. Suddenly, the fog lifts. The confusion dissolves. The empath can see again, clearly, sharply, powerfully. Their inner voice becomes louder. Their instincts become sharper. Their ability to feel what is real and what is manipulation becomes almost supernatural. This is because narcissists rely on confusion. Once that confusion disappears, the empath's natural intuitive power floods back. For the first time in a long time, the empath begins trusting their gut, and their gut becomes their greatest protection. 2. Sharper discernment. They now see people's intentions instantly. After experiencing deception, love bombing, gaslighting, and emotional exploitation, an empath's discernment becomes unmatched. They can now spot fake kindness, hidden agendas, emotional instability, broken boundaries, narcissistic traits, and energy parasites. They see what others cannot see. They feel what others ignore. The empath becomes spiritually trained by the very pain they survived. This discernment becomes their armor. It protects them from ever repeating the past. They move differently. They choose differently. They love differently. And this discernment becomes their armor. 3. Emotional intelligence expands to a higher level. Empaths already have high emotional intelligence, but after separation, it evolves into something deeper, something sacred. They understand human behavior with clarity. They recognize patterns instantly. They can decode emotional manipulation before it even starts. The pain becomes wisdom. The trauma becomes teaching. The confusion becomes clarity. And this emotional clarity becomes the foundation of their new identity, an empath who is no longer fragile, but empowered. 4. A spiritual awakening begins. Breaking the narcissistic contract opens a spiritual portal for the empath. It is the beginning of soul alignment, inner healing, divine protection, ancestral guidance, and spiritual remembrance. The empath starts feeling guided. Synchronicities appear, dreams become messages, signs become frequent, the heart becomes lighter. It's as if the universe says, now the real journey begins. All the gifts that were blocked, intuition, sensitivity, awareness, creativity, and spiritual connection begin to flow freely. The empath enters a higher vibration, leaving behind the darkness they once normalized. 5. Purpose unlocks. They finally step into their calling. The narcissist relationship was not a punishment, it was preparation. Preparation 4, their spiritual mission, their purpose, their soul work, their transformation, their higher self. Once the toxic cycle ends, the empath begins discovering who they really are and what they were born to do. For many, creativity explodes, healing abilities awaken, leadership begins naturally, wisdom becomes effortless, their life path becomes clearer. The suffering they endured becomes the reason they will help others. The pain turns into purpose. What the narcissist tried to destroy becomes the empath's greatest power. 6. Their energy field resets. When the empath is separated from the narcissist, their energy is no longer drained. This creates emotional strength, a calmer nervous system, clearer thoughts, deeper self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and a renewed spirit. The empath's aura becomes brighter. People notice it. They glow. They radiate peace and power. The universe begins sending better people, better opportunities, and better connections because the empath is no longer vibrating from pain, but from awakening. 7. Self-love becomes their new foundation. One of the greatest gifts unlocked after separation is self-love, true self-love. Not the temporary kind, not the hopeful kind, but the unshakable, sacred, empowered form of self-love that grows only after surviving emotional warfare. This self-love becomes their new standard, their new boundary, their new protection, their new identity. The empath realizes they were never weak. They were strong enough to love deeply in a world that often loves shallowly. And now they direct that love toward themselves. 8. They become spiritually untouchable. After awakening, the empath becomes the version of themselves that the narcissist always feared: confident, aware, protected, aligned, awakened. Spiritually, they reach a frequency where narcissists can no longer enter. Manipulation no longer works. Trauma bonds no longer hold power. Old patterns no longer attract them. The empath becomes untouchable, not because they're cold, but because they're awakened. 9. Higher connections replace the toxic ones. The empath's vibration rises. When this happens, better friendships appear, healthier love begins, supportive communities form, and divine partnerships come forward. The universe replaces everything they lost with better. Better love, better peace, better alignment, better protection, better purpose. Their soul begins to attract what was always meant for them. 10. The contract ending becomes the birth of their next level. My final point is this: the empath thinks the separation is the end, but spiritually, it is the beginning. A new life, a higher timeline, a stronger identity, a deeper truth, a powerful destiny. The empath's gifts do not just return after separation, they activate. They rise. They transform. They guide the empath into the life they were always meant to live. The contract ending did not break the empath, it awakened them.